Okay, there is a study which looked at a variety of studies around the world. And what it determined is that, yes, indeed, gun safety regulation does help when it comes to reducing gun crime. People are less likely to kill people with guns if guns aren't as freely available. Shocking, isn't it, Lewis?
I'm not shocked at all. No.
There's this massive and controversial question, right? Do gun safety regulations actually have an effect on gun crimes, shootings, gun deaths, etc.? Or are the laws irrelevant and pointless, as some have pointed out in the aftermath of the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting? There is a study published a few months ago in the February issue of Epidemiologic Reviews, which looked at this issue internationally, and it looked at evidence from around the world on gun laws and gun violence to see what happened in different countries when there were gun safety regulations passed. And the study found a very compelling trend, which showed that new restrictions on gun purchasing and ownership correlated with a decline in gun deaths. Now, of course, we have to distinguish correlation is not necessarily causation, but the data is quite compelling. The meta-analysis looked at about 130 studies in 10 different countries, and the conclusion was correlation. Gun violence declined after countries passed a series of gun laws at the same time. And usually these were packages which overhauled the country's firearm code pretty broadly, and they tended to have pretty similar features. You ban weapons that are very powerful, like automatic weapons and so-called assault-style weapons. I know that that's not a specific weapon. People always email, they say, anyone who uses that term doesn't understand anything. That's not a specific gun. Yeah, we know that. We're talking about a colloquial classification of weapons. They all implemented full background check policies. They all required permits and licenses for purchasing guns. These are not hugely controversial ideas other than the first one. The idea of banning certain types of firearms is very controversial, but background checks and permitting and licensing, even in the United States, are relatively uncontroversial. In South Africa, for example, South African Firearm Control Act in 2000, firearm homicides dropped nearly 14% per year for the following 5 years. Austria's 1997 firearm law required background checks, limited access to powerful firearms. It imposed rules about how gun owners had to store their guns. Firearms homicides down 5%, firearms suicides down 10%. We know about the 1996 National Firearms Agreement in Australia, which flat out confiscated hundreds of thousands of guns in addition to imposing background checks and licensing rules. 8 studies in Australia found significant reductions in firearms deaths. Now, a common counterpoint, Lewis, is, well, hold on a second. The dynamic is different in developed versus developing countries. Well, most of these 130 studies were in the developed world, right? Australia, Austria. Very few were in the developing world. A couple studies in Brazil, for example, but very, very few. Another counterpoint, fine. You ban guns, gun homicides go down, but people find other means to kill others. Actually, when you look at these studies, they show that the non-firearms homicide reductions were also observed, which sort of completely deflates, Lewis, that common argument. People will just find something else to kill others with. Well, they may try, and we hear about mass stabbing attempts, including one in China recently where 20 people were stabbed and nobody died.
Children.
I wonder.
That was like 20 children.
20 children.
Yeah.
I wonder if the mass stabbing attempt in China, if the perpetrator had an AR-15, if nobody would have died. I think not. I think people would have definitely died.
Right. And so guns just make it easier to kill people. And when it's much easier to do something you want to do, maybe that makes you more likely to do it.
People may be less likely to kill others in general. We talk about the reduction in the crime rate, broadly speaking, in the United States, etc. Yes, it's true. They may attempt to use another weapon, but many of those other weapons lack the reach and the lethality of guns, and that makes it so that these non-gun attacks or attacks with handguns instead of AR-15s, for example, are going to leave fewer victims. I mean, it's just simple math. And the mass stabbing thing is really notable. I know some gun fetishists say that's so stupid to talk about mass stabbings.
Have you seen the pic? Some of these gun fetishists will put up a picture on Facebook of someone who got mutilated by a knife.
Yeah.
And they'll say, look, Knives are just as bad.
Yeah.
I mean, can you think of anything more, distracting and dishonest than putting up a picture like that?
Of course. And I would say, well, how long did it take to mutilate that absolutely tragic and unfortunate situation? But how long did it take for that person to become so mutilated with a knife?
Doesn't
And
even
if
matter.
that individual had an AR-15, what could they have done in that same amount of time? But I know what you mean, Lewis. The
Yeah.
fetishists don't care.
No, they don't care. They value guns. Most of them. I'm not going to say all of them. Most of them value the guns more than lives, and they think that they are completely safe because they have guns, and just not true.
We'll take a break. We'll take your phone calls next. I've talked about how people of all ages, but particularly millennials, are owning cars less and participating more in the sharing economy. And one of the more popular options is Zipcar, which gets you a car when you want it, when you need it. They offer all sorts of cars, SUVs, hybrids, whatever you need. It includes insurance and it includes gas. You just pay for the time that you actually use the car. And you can reserve the car online from your smartphone over the phone. Then you unlock it with your Zip card. Each car share member reduces their personal CO2 emissions by between 1,100 and 1,600 pounds per year. For our audience, Zipcar is offering $25 of free driving credit if you sign up at joinzipcar.com/David. Support our show, reduce your carbon emissions and your spending on cars. Sign up at joinzipcar.com/David.